Day 606, Wednesday, February 19th. Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel 1:1-28 NKJV. Now it came to pass in the 30th year in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Shebar, that the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Shebar, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Also from within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Each one had 4 faces, and each one had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of calves' feet. They sparkled like the color of burnished bronze. The hands of a man were under their wings on their 4 sides, and each of the 4 had faces and wings. Their wings touched one another. The creatures did not turn when they went, but each one went straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and each of the 4 had the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces. Their wings stretched upward. 2 wings of each one touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies. And each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted to go, and they did not turn when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches going back and forth among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and out of the fire went lightning, and the living creatures ran back and forth in appearance like a flash of lightning. Now as I looked at the living creatures, behold, a wheel was on the earth beside each living creature with its 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their workings was like the color of beryl, and all 4 had the same likeness. The appearance of their workings was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they moved, they went toward any one of 4 directions. They did not turn aside when they went. As for their rims, they were so high they were awesome, and their rims were full of eyes all around the 4 of them. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them, and when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go they went, because there the Spirit went, and the wheels were lifted together with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went. When those stood, these stood. And when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up together with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The likeness of the firmament above the heads of the living creatures was like the color of an awesome crystal, stretched out over their heads. And under the firmament their wings spread out straight, one toward another. Each one had 2 which covered one side, and each one had 2 which covered the other side of the body. When they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a tumult like the noise of an army. And when they stood still, they let down their wings. A voice came from above the firmament that was over their heads. Whenever they stood, they let down their wings. And above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. Also, from the appearance of his waist and upward I saw, as it were, the color of amber with the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his waist and downward I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire with brightness all around. Like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking. Daily Deep Dive. The UCG reading plan states, recall from 2 Kings 24:10-16 that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah and took away 10,000 captives, including the Jewish king Jehoiachin, or Jeconiah. This was the 2nd Babylonian deportation of the Jews, which took place in 597 BC. The prophet Ezekiel was among a group of these captives, as the Jewish historian Josephus also relates Antiquities of the Jews, Book 10, Chap. 6 Sec. Ezekiel's group was resettled by the river Shebar, Ezekiel 1:1, southeast of Babylon. Ezekiel 1:1-3 and Ezekiel 3:15 clearly define the place of origin of Ezekiel's ministry as Babylonia, specifically at the site of Tel Aviv located near the Kibar River and the ancient site of Nippur. This river has been identified by many with the Naru Kabari, or Grand Canal, mentioned in 2 cuneiform texts from Nippur, a canal making a southeasterly loop, connecting at both ends with the Euphrates River. The Expositor's Bible Commentary, Introduction to Ezekiel. During this period, the Jews were allowed to live in communities in whatever area of the empire to which they were transported. they seem to have been viewed more as colonists than slaves. Ezekiel himself was married until his wife suddenly died, and he had a house. Ezekiel 24:15-18, Ezekiel 3:24, Ezekiel 8:1. Elders of Judah frequently consulted him. Ezekiel 8:1, Ezekiel 11:25, Ezekiel 14:1, Ezekiel 21, etc. Introduction to Ezekiel. Recall from 2 Kings 20:10-16 that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah and took away 10,000 captives, including the Jewish king Jehoiachin or Jeconiah. This was the second Babylonian deportation of the Jews, which took place in 597 BC. The prophet Ezekiel was among a group of these captives, as the Jewish historian Josephus also relates. Antiquities of the Jews, Book 10, Chap. 6, Se Sec. 3. Ezekiel's group was resettled by the river Shebar. Ezekiel 1:1 southeast of Babylon. Ezekiel 1:1-3 and Ezekiel 3:15 clearly define the place of origin of Ezekiel's ministry as Babylonia, specifically at the site of Tel Aviv located near the Kebar River and the ancient site of Nippur. This river has been identified by many with the Naru Kabari or Grand Canal, mentioned in two cuneiform texts from Nippur, a canal making a southeasterly loop, connecting at both ends with the Euphrates River. The Expositor's Bible Commentary, Introduction to Ezekiel. During this period, the Jews were allowed to live in communities in whatever area of the empire to which they were transported. They seem to have been viewed more as colonists than slaves. Ezekiel himself was married until his wife suddenly died, and he had a house. Ezekiel 24:15-18, Ezekiel 3:24, Ezekiel 8:1. Elders of Judah frequently consulted him. Ezekiel 8:1, Ezekiel 14:1, Ezekiel 21, etc. The book of Ezekiel begins with an account of the prophet's calling, which occurred in the 30th year on the 5th day of the 4th month. Ezekiel 1:1. This date is equated in verse 2 with the 5th day of the month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity. Since the captivity began in 597 BC, the 5th year would have been 593. Some understand the 30th year to be counted from Josiah's renewal of the covenant between God and Judah in the 18th year of his reign, 623-622 BC. See Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 34:29-33. However, there is nothing to hint at such a connection, and the covenant had long since been trampled upon in the 16 years since Josiah's death. A more reasonable conclusion is that the 30th year refers to Ezekiel's age, especially when we consider that he was a priest. Ezekiel 1:3. Since a man entered into priestly service at the age of 30, Numbers 4:3-23-30, 1 Chronicles 23, God may have elected to start using him as a prophet at this critical age, perhaps highlighting the priestly aspect of Ezekiel's commission. It is interesting to note that if he were 30 years old at this point, Ezekiel would have been born at the time of Josiah's covenant renewal. There is a strong emphasis on chronology throughout the book of Ezekiel. It contains 13 prophecies dated from the time Jeconiah was taken into exile, the first in 593, the last in 571, thus spanning 22 years. 4 periods are specified. The first 5 years, 593 to 588 BC, 517, the next 2 years, 587 to 585 BC, surrounding the fall of Jerusalem in 586, 26, 1 to 29, surrounding the fall of Jerusalem, the first final manner, final message against Egypt, and a final message against Egypt 2 years after that, 29 to 17 to 5. Ezekiel's commission was to serve as a watchman for God's people, a sentry who warned of impending danger. See Ezekiel 3:33. As we will see, his messages were meant in large part for the house of Israel, even though the northern 10 tribes had been taken into captivity about 130 years earlier. Ezekiel 3:1-4-3-7-17, Ezekiel 33:7-10-11-20. In fact, the phrase House of Israel occurs 78 times plus House of Jacob 1 time in this book, while House of Judah occurs only 5 times. In some cases, the name Israel is used to designate Judah, but there are numerous instances where it is clear that the northern tribes are meant. Since God would never be a century late in delivering a warning message, it seems clear that he must have inspired significant portions of the book primarily for the end-time descendants of Israel. However, some of the specific prophecies were meant for Ezekiel's time, and some others are dual, meant for Ezekiel's day and the end time. The spiritually deteriorating conditions in Judah were a type of the end-time decline of modern Israelite nations, and the approaching destruction and captivity of Judah was a type of what would happen to the nations of Israel, especially the descendants of Joseph, just prior to Christ's return. In the setting in which Ezekiel found himself, he taught, comforted, and encouraged the Jews who were with him in exile. As part of his watchman responsibility, he was also to relay to them God's warnings of Jerusalem's coming destruction due to the sins of the Jewish people. And he proved faithful in delivering these important messages, even acting out various judgments or prophecies at God's direction to make the point clear. At the same time, as we've seen, the prophet Jeremiah was giving a similar warning 600 miles away in Jerusalem to the Jews who were living there. Interestingly, both Ezekiel and Jeremiah were priests called to a prophetic office. A comparative study of their messages provides a clear picture of how much God warned the Jews to repent before their nation was destroyed in 586 BC. Indeed, we've seen that Jeremiah sent messages to the exiles in Babylon. See Jeremiah 29-30. Perhaps some of Ezekiel's prophecies were likewise proclaimed to the Jews of Judah, by letter or just through the reporting of others. Of course, as with those of Jeremiah, many of Ezekiel's prophecies were, as already noted, recorded principally for posterity's sake, with many having dual or even exclusive application to events far in the future. One of the recurrent themes in Ezekiel's prophecies is that God is sovereign, and people will ultimately learn that lesson. The phrase, "Then they will know that I am the Lord," occurs no less than 65 times in the book. Jerusalem is the focal point of Ezekiel's prophecies. He begins with what was to occur to Jerusalem in his day, and then moves on to the events prophesied for the end of the age. He closes the book with a wonderful vision of conditions that will exist after the return of Christ. Yet throughout the first 34 chapters, Ezekiel moves back and forth between prophecies for his own day and the end time, many of the historical events foretold serving as types of what is to come in the end time. Ezekiel's name means, God is strong. Compare Ezekiel 3:14. God strengthens. Compare Ezekiel 0:25-4:16, or may God strengthen. As the book opens, we see how God strengthened him with powerful visions so he could perform the job he was called to do. The appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. The first chapter of Ezekiel is one of the most revealing and exciting in the entire Bible. Ezekiel tells us that the heavens opened, and he saw visions of God, i.e., not God in reality but rather in a mental picture, which no one else who might have been with Ezekiel could actually see. Of all the men whom God inspired to write the scriptures, only three, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and the Apostle John, recorded visions of God's throne. Isaiah's description, which we read earlier, is very short, Isaiah 6:1-6. Ezekiel gives us much more detail. The hand of the Lord on Ezekiel, Ezekiel 1:3, represented the strength God was imparting to him. In addition to verification that God was the author of the message, Ezekiel needed encouragement and strength from God in order to do the work God was commissioning him to do, which we will read about in chapters 2-3, a continuation of the same passage. Ezekiel sees a great windstorm coming, an immense cloud with flashing lightning, surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing, sparkling gold. Ezekiel 1:4. This is perhaps reminiscent of the pillar of cloud and fire that led Israel out of Egypt. Recall that the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ dwelt in that cloud, which was illuminated with divine glory, the shining radiance of God. Indeed, the glory of the Lord is specifically mentioned here in Ezekiel. Ezekiel 1:28, Ezekiel 3:12. The word for glory suggests weight or significance, indicating the wonder, majesty, and worthiness of the living God. The Nelson Study Bible, note on Ezekiel 3:12-13. This visible glory was referred to by later Jewish commentators as the Shekinah, or indwelling, as it was the evidence of God's presence among his people. The Shekinah glory not only led Israel out of Egypt, Exodus 16:10, it also appeared in the tabernacle, Exodus 40:34, in the Temple of Solomon, 2 Chronicles 5:14, to the shepherds at Christ's birth, Luke 2:9, and as surrounding God's throne in John's vision, Revelation 15:8. The throne imagery here is somewhat different from that of God the Father's heavenly throne room in Revelation. That's because this image is of a transportable throne moving about the earth, and the Lord who sits on this particular throne is again the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. Still, there are some clear similarities, as we will see. The whirlwind comes from the north, perhaps because the north seems to indicate the general area of the sky where the heaven of God's throne is located. Lucifer is pictured attempting to assault God's throne on the farthest sides of the north, Isaiah 14:13. Whirlwinds from God are recorded several times in the scriptures. The 10 Commandments were given in a great tempest of thunder and fire, Exodus 19. Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind, 2 Kings 2:1, 2 Kings 2:11, and the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind, Job 38:1. Jesus Christ will return to the earth in a whirlwind, Isaiah 6:15, Zechariah 9:14. Interestingly, this passage of Ezekiel was in Christ's day read in synagogues at the time of Pentecost, and it was on Pentecost that a sound of rushing wind and tongues of fire accompanied the coming of God's Holy Spirit to empower members of his church. See Acts 2, Compare Ezekiel 2:2. As the whirlwind approached, Ezekiel was able to make out the likenesses of 4 living creatures, angelic beings. These are referred to in Ezekiel 10 as cherubs or cherubim. Their function here is to uphold and transport the throne of God. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Ezekiel 1:5. The word likeness is translated from the Hebrew demututh, which means resemblance. They had the general appearance of human beings at first glance, meaning they apparently stood upright on 2 legs. However, there were marked differences. Ezekiel notices that each one had 4 faces, 4 wings and feet like calves that sparkled like bronze, seeming to indicate hooves. Concerning the faces, Ezekiel tells us that each had the face of a man, of a lion on the right side, of an ox on the left side, and of an eagle. The human face was evidently facing Ezekiel, and the eagle face was behind. This does not mean the human face was the primary one, for when the 4 faces are listed in Ezekiel 10, the face of a cherub is substituted for the ox face and called the first face. Ezekiel 10. So why did the human faces look toward Ezekiel, while the ox or cherub faces looked to the left? The directions here are significant. Bear in mind that the throne and creatures were coming from the north. Ezekiel therefore viewed them from the south, so the south face of each was human. The west face of each was that of the ox or cherub. The north face of each was that of the eagle, and the east face of each was that of the lion. Considering the traveling throne and cherubim together as a unit, the main face looking to the south from it was the south face of the south-positioned cherub, the human face. The main face looking to the west was the west face of the west-positioned cherub, the ox face. The main faces looking out from the vehicle on the north and east were the eagle and lion respectively. As was mentioned in the Beyond Today Bible commentary on Numbers 2, this was the exact configuration of the Israelite camp in the wilderness, wherein the 4 primary tribal standards of Israel, the lion of Judah, the eagle of Dan, the bull of Ephraim, and the man representing Reuben, were positioned around the ancient tabernacle containing the Ark of the Covenant, itself a representation of God's throne. A similar vision of 4 living creatures surrounding God's throne was given to the Apostle John in Revelation. However, the creatures there are not described as humanoid in appearance or as each having multiple faces. And in the midst of the throne, and around the throne, were 4 living creatures. The first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf, the third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. Revelation 4:6-7. The creatures could be the same, or the same in type. Perhaps these extra-dimensional beings look quite different when viewed from different angles. Or, as noted in the Beyond Today Bible commentary on Isaiah 6, perhaps they are capable of changing shape or manifesting themselves in different forms to human beings. The creatures in the visions of Isaiah 6 and Revelation 4 had 6 wings. These in Ezekiel's vision are described as having only 4. But again, that could be due to shape shifting or viewing from a different angle, or because the wings were engaged in different activities. Consider that Ezekiel saw a wheel over the ground beside each creature, Ezekiel 1:15. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel, or a wheel spinning inside a wheel. Or rather, their workings gave this appearance. Verse 16. Perhaps the wheel beside each creature is the missing 2 wings in motion, similar to the effect produced by a hummingbird's wings. Note that Ezekiel describes the sound of the cherub wings not as the whooshing of slow flapping, but as the noise of many waters, a tumult like the noise of an army. Verse 24. Possibly like a modern helicopter. Ezekiel later says the wheels are called whirling. See Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary. Note on Ezekiel 10:13. Perhaps the wings whirled, creating the wheel effect. Isaiah 6:2 says that only 2 of the 6 seraphim wings were used for flying. However, Ezekiel describes the wheels as having very high rims or rings that were full of eyes. Ezekiel 1:18. Perhaps these were indeed actual chariot wheels, the eyes being jewels. Or again, the rims could have been an effect produced by the fluttering wings. John 2 saw a multitude of eyes, 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and in back, and the 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within. Revelation 4:6, Revelation 4:8. If the eyes are associated with the wings, perhaps this is similar to peacock plumage, where what appear to be eyes can be seen from either side. The wings of some butterflies and moth wings are also decorated with what appear to be eyes. Ezekiel says that the entire throne-carrying system of these 4 creatures was guided by a spirit. Verse 20. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them. He observes that the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The Hebrew word for spirit is ruach, also translated duend. The source of the windstorm's power was evidently the wind created by the wheels. Interestingly, Zechariah 5:9 describes wind as being in the wings of flying creatures. This gives us more reason to believe the wheels of Ezekiel's vision to be wings. Of course, as these are spirit beings, we should not conclude that wings and wind in the physical medium of air are an actual necessity for their ability to fly. Next, Ezekiel describes a firmament, or platform of crystal stretched out over the heads of the cherubim, on which sat the sapphire blue throne of God. Ezekiel 1:22. Such a crystalline expanse is also described by John. Also before the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass clear as crystal. Revelation 4. It was also seen by Moses and the elders of Israel when they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. Exodus 4:10. Perhaps the sapphire throne was being reflected in the crystal floor beneath it. In the crowning moment of the vision, Ezekiel heard a voice from above the expanse over the heads of the cherubim, as they stood with lowered wings. Above the great crystalline platform was the sapphire throne, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man, a likeness with the appearance of a man. Verse 26. The Hebrew for likeness is again, demuth. Man was made in the likeness of God. Genesis 1:26, Genesis 5:1, to look like him. For further proof that God, though eternal spirit, has a body with a form and shape resembling that of human beings. Send for or download our free booklet, Who is God? Ezekiel saw that from the waist up God's appearance was like radiant gold, and that from the waist down it was like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Ezekiel later sees the same glorious form in vision in chapter 8. John described the glorified Jesus Christ similarly in Revelation 1:14-16. His eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace. His countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. The magnificent brilliance surrounding God and his throne was his awesome, radiating glory, which appeared like a rainbow. John also saw the rainbow but pointed out that its predominant color was emerald green. Revelation 4:3. Ezekiel makes no such note. Perhaps it pulsed with various hues. In any event, the scene was spectacular and humbling. Ezekiel fell face down in reverence and awe, and the great God of the universe began to address him. God, as our next reading reveals, was here to call and commission Ezekiel the priest as his prophet. End.